Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 9th Sustainability Week here at Economist Impact. Really glad to see you. Today, I'm Dení Pörtl. I will be moderating the session today on regenerative agriculture. And I want to welcome all our wonderful panelists today. So, Sarah Compson, Associate Director of Standards and Innovation on Soil Association. Meagan Kaiser, U.S. Farmer and Chief Operating Officer of Agricultural Laboratory and US Soil. Melanie Bausen-Wiens, Senior Vice President of Regulatory, Sustainability and Public Affairs, Agricultural Solutions from BASF. Charlie Angelakos, Vice President of Global External Affairs and Sustainability from McCain Foods. And Sonia Simia, Senior Director of Global Sustainability at Heineken Group. This panel is on regenerative agriculture, and to start off, I wanted to say that regenerative agriculture is perhaps something quite new, and it's about the sustainable practices that aim to improve soil health, biodiversity, but it also aims to benefit farmers and communities. I was reading an article on the World Economic Forum, and it said that more than 50% of the land in the world is degraded, and that is equivalent to an economic loss of $400 billion annually. And of course, it's not only this. It's not only this economic loss, but we also have to look at the food security aspect of it, no? So this article also stated that if we continue in this way, then in 50 years we won't have enough soil to cultivate the land, no? To have food. So I want us to start off this panel by looking at the regenerative aspect in regenerative agriculture. So what do we mean, perhaps for the audience that might not be as knowledgeable as our experts here? What do we mean by regenerative agriculture? Maybe Meagan, could you start us off?
Of course, yeah, thank you. This is such an it's something we talk about often. In US soy, because regenerative hasn't been well defined, if you look it up on the internet. So here's what it means to me as a farmer and to many of the folks that I work with. But it means not only sustaining, not continually doing what we're doing, but to raise a crop, and when we have that removal from the land, to put it back. And not only to put it back in what we just think we know, but to measure it and say, do I need phosphorus or do I need potassium? Or maybe I need calcium. Maybe I need to work on the actual structure of the soil. And so we look at minimizing tillage, we look at cover crops, but really we look at building that soil so it's got the structure to house the biological activity, which then builds that carbon in that sequestration, and then has the nutrient turnover to grow the next crop. So it's not only about regenerating, but about resilience and about building for the future.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know, Charlie, if you have any.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I answer that question, I think you're spot on the definition. I think it's important to say why, as a company, all of us are doing regenerative agriculture. So, as a business, we probably would have dealt with one climate event every 15 years. And in the last 5 years, we've probably been dealing with 5 to 7 climate events a year. We never really know where they're going to pop up, but they're all over the world. It could be a fire, it could be a drought, could be heavy rain, which has been wiping out the crop for our farmers. So what we did is we did a climate study that studied past weather patterns and then looked forward to 2050 as to what needed to be done. And the results of that climate study were extremely startling for us, which is why we've made a commitment that 100% of our acreage will be regeneratively farmed by 2030. And that's really why we are adopting a lot of the practices that you spoke about.
Perfect. And talking about the benefits of regenerative agriculture, because we know they are different, and not only for the environment, but also for the farmers and for the communities. So Sonia, I don't know if you want to input on this, kind of the benefits.
Very, very happy to. And I'd start it off with a bit of context as to why is agriculture important for us in Heineken. So not surprisingly, when we make our beer, our seltzers, our wine, agriculture is a huge input in terms of making the products that we have. And very much like you, we've also seen the impacts of climate. So from a benefit point of view as a business, for us, it's about continuity of supply and building climate resilient agricultural supply chains to really understand, how we maintain that for the long term. The second point is around climate, which you also mentioned. And for us, there's a real link between what we do in agri and what happens on the climate agenda. So our second biggest contributor to our carbon footprint is agriculture at about 19%. So we started a program a couple of years back, which we called low carbon farming. And we worked with 300 pilots globally, and we found that through that, we could reduce carbon emissions by 13% and improve sequestration by 82%. So for us, we see it as a huge plank for how do we really address our carbon footprint in a sustainable way. But also we have to recognize it's not just about what's good for us as a business. We need to think about what's in it for the farmers and what are the benefits that farmers get as well, because it has to be mutually beneficial in some way. And some of the themes are similar in terms of climate resilience. But also I think there's an opportunity for farmers when you look at things like diversifying some of their agricultural practices. So things like cover cropping or livestock integration or agroforestry. It brings in an additional income stream, which helps with the financial stability, which is a real issue for the farming sector. So I think there's a number of benefits, which is great to celebrate while also recognizing the challenges we need to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, Sarah, perhaps how does regenerative agriculture affect farmers' livelihoods?
Well, in a nutshell, very positively. And, it's real music to my ears and the ears of the Soil Association to hear regenerative agriculture being centred in a conversation about sustainable agriculture future. Organic farmers have been pioneering regenerative agriculture for at least 70 years now. And there's so much that organic farmers have learnt about how to really embed agriculture, sustainable agricultural practices, regenerative agricultural practices that they can share with farmers beyond just the organic sector. So I think it's it's incredibly positive to be having these conversations. And I think the challenge is how do we move quickly enough and meaningfully enough. And I think that would be a great thing. I know we're hoping to explore today.
Yeah, perfect. And I wanted to hear your different points of view, but to what extent are farmers supported, to implement this regenerative agriculture? Because you need perhaps education, and you need to tell them how to do things, where they're perhaps not used to doing this kind of thing. So yeah, Melanie.
Happy to answer that, at least give it a try. So, and let me speak from BASF perspective. We've been a strong partner to farmers for over 100 years now to help them with sustainable farming. And the way I see regenerative agriculture is it's an important concept for transforming agriculture into a future really sustainable agriculture. BASF sees itself as a solution provider. So the positive change happens with the farmer. They are out in the field, they're actually applying their agricultural practices, but we can give them the toolbox that they need to actually be successful. And yesterday I actually spoke with one of the UK farmers that we collaborate on a sustainability project with, and he said a couple of things that resonated very strongly with me. The first thing he said was, sustainability comes with profitability. So for the farmer, there has to be an economic return on investment. He needs to be at least as profitable, ideally even more profitable with the regenerative agriculture than before. And the second thing he said, and that resonated a lot with me as well, was there's no one size fits all. The climate conditions, the regional conditions out in the fields are very different depending on which country or which region you look at. And one practice might work in a certain environment and might not work in the other. And that's why you need a full toolbox. So it can't be too prescriptive, you can't force them into a too stringent, fulfill this criteria and you can be called regenerative agriculture. You have to allow them to use the full toolbox. And from a BASF perspective, that can be nitrogen management products to improve fertilizer efficiency. It can be better herbicides to allow for less or even no tillage. It could be better crop varieties that are stress resilient and require less efforts. So there's a huge opportunity here in a full toolbox for the farmer then to apply it, because these are farmers that are working the land for generations. And one thing he said was, and I think that will also resonate with you, is be kind to the land. That's part of the DNA, because they want to really bring it into the next generation and the next generation, but they need help doing that.
Interesting. Charlie, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, absolutely. So like everybody here, we built our business in partnership with the farmer. And early on, our mantra has been, if we don't get the agronomy right, nothing else matters. So from a regenerative agriculture perspective, we worked with our farming partners to build a regenerative agriculture code. And that code would be how we would implement regenerative agriculture at the farm level. We're a bit different than other companies in that we have a direct-to-farmer relationship, so we are able to deal with our farmers directly. So once we had the code in place and pressure tested that with our farming community, we began training. It could be soil health training and different things on the ground. The other thing that we're really proud of is we've launched these farms of the future. There are 3 of them that have been announced. One is in Canada, and one is in South Africa. And the reason that's important is there is not a one-size-fits-all solution, as you said. So the farm of the future in Africa is a 4 growing season farm. So we can export best practices from Africa to our farmer partners in Latin America. In Canada, conversely, it's a 1 season farm. So you get that analog, and it's a best practice sort of echo chamber along the way. And these are commercial grade farms that McCain owns and operates. We've had a lot of great successes where we've shown that yields have been flat or growing with environmental indicators pointing in the right direction. But we've also failed, and I think that's okay, because we are failing so the farmer does not have to fail. So on top of that, from the farms of the future, we have also mapped the globe in terms of financial levers that we can pull together with our farmer. So in some parts of the world, we have long-term contracts where if a farmer farms regeneratively per our code, they will have a long-term contract and an increase per tonnage for following the regenerative agriculture code. We've also entered into partnerships with banks as well, where we backstop loans, write off interests as well. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and we're looking to work in partnership with our farmer to pull every possible lever that we can to implement regenerative agriculture to build that sustainable food supply chain that we all know is critically important in the years to come.
Perfect. And I wanted to talk about the regulation around regenerative agriculture. So what incentives do businesses need in order to adopt regenerative agriculture? I know that you've all, like, this has already been done, but if there's anything else that is still...
Well, I think from a farming perspective, and stepping back from the regulation aspect, but from a farming perspective, the profit aspect is really important. But I also know that my sustainability story doesn't stop at my farm gate, that it's in every product that is created beyond the, so the feed that is used, then the animal that eats the feed is more sustainable because I chose to do more sustainable practices. But keeping in mind also that one part of the soybean is also oil. And when we talk about sustainable aviation fuel, we talk about renewable diesel, which is a cleaner burning, less particulate matter oil that we have, another aspect of sustainability to play. And so yield is very important into fulfilling those goals. One of the stories we work with bioheat with our soybean oil. And in the northeast of the United States, a lot of people use heating oil to heat their homes. And it hit home today when they were talking in the one of the first sessions about having indoor pollution. But the bioheat, when they first started, they thought it was a failure when they would burn the bioheat because the pilot light would turn off because it was so clean burning. The pilot light sensed that there was no flame. what a difference that can make worldwide when we really start to look at clean burning fuels, and what pride I take in not only taking care of my soils to make sure that we think generationally that my children have the option to farm if they want to, but that we also have this impact on other children around the world having cleaner air to breathe.
Perfect. Sarah, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, you can see on my face. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's three key roles that regulation can play. One is to encourage the phasing out of the very worst practices, and one of those I would like to see a phasing out of the use of pesticides and artificial fertilizers, because they're a huge driver of climate change and biodiversity loss. And if we don't get on top of that, we're going to have a problem. There's a really interesting report by the World Resources Benchmark Institute that says that whilst there's I think it was 51% of the companies that they surveyed were talking about regen, but only 4% could actually talk about pesticide reduction. If we don't get on top of that, we're never really going to crack regenerative. So phasing out the worst, encouraging the best, which is probably a bit more music to people's ears. That's a really important aspect of it. And then also safeguarding around claims. So the great thing about regen is it's accessible to everyone. Every farmer can start doing regen. So regulation hasn't shut that down. But the flip side of that is that it risks greenwashing. And that's where, so in the organic sector, organic is a regulated sector. So we can be really sure that when an organic claim is made by a farmer, they can't just make that claim. They have to really demonstrate it is really robust. So that's, in a way, that can be a blessing and a curse. But I think from an organic perspective, we see that as a real blessing and really important as we're entering this new phase where all of agriculture is going to have to make a shift, and we need to make sure it's meaningful.
Perfect. Sonia, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do. And just touching on what you said about greenwashing, I think one of the areas where we struggle is to have consistent definitions about what do we mean by regenerative agriculture. And you've all touched on it to a certain extent, and some are emerging through the SCI platform, through EIT, but I still think we have an issue in terms of consistency of definition. What types of practices are we talking about? Lots of companies are talking about it, but what sits behind it? And what are the methodologies to measure impact? That's really important. What are the KPIs, the outcome-based KPIs across soil health, carbon, water, biodiversity, and importantly, the livelihoods of farmers, that we can really point it to say, what does good look like? So I think there's something here about consistency of definition. And then you asked a question around policy. I think the biggest challenge in terms of why we're not able to scale is financing. And it's the elephant in the room. We have to be honest. A lot of the time when you move from traditional, and I hesitate when I say that, practices to regenerative, you see a yield dip. And this leads to what I call the income gap. And so for the income for the farmers can go down. Not always, but sometimes it can go down. From anything to 3 to 7 years. How do we address that? How do we address that through the businesses who are involved, but also through policy and regulation? What we're seeing in terms of subsidies is something we really need to rehaul to think about how do we encourage more of that good. But I think the whole financing space and subsidies and how do we really engage with that is an important lever we can play as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in one of my please.
No,
please,
I was just going to add to that, though. From putting on my soil science laboratory hat, we work with clients that when they adopt more regenerative practices, and we act like this is all like one thing, like one template, and it's not. So when they start to work their way, measurement of what they actually started with in their soil and figuring out what actually moves the needle. One of the biggest challenges is that we test 5 different ways of testing carbon in our laboratory. 4 of them are not terribly repeatable, and those are the 4 that everybody's talking about using, and then they say there's no repeatable test. And so I do think the methodology on measuring carbon, I think that almost everybody does better if you say, here's your goal, and here's how you can work toward it. We don't really have that in carbon sequestration or even in carbon measurement at this time. So when I look at it, I'm measuring based on what's the organic matter or the product of the biological activity in the soil, and can I make that build? Because then I know all systems are go. Things are really working and the nutrient turnover is happening. And that in turn helps my profitability. So when I hear, it's not profitable in the first couple of years, a lot of that is because we didn't pay attention to the fact that a cover crop is still a crop and it has nutritional needs. We did a science experiment, good old-fashioned science experiment, where we did grid soil testing, 1 every hectare, and measured it for 2 years. And then on the 3rd year, the farmer didn't tell me, but he had a growing cover crop. And we had been building the soil, and then all of a sudden, woof, it went back to where we started. It took 2 more years for that nutrition to release from those cover crops. And so the crops in between had less nutrition to work with. And so when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we have to be very holistic about the situation. And, you know, we can do it with both all types, to your point, of organic all the way through, you know, whatever you want to call traditional or whatnot. Everybody can benefit from this, but we still have to measure and say, I measured this, I put this on, I took this off, I measured again, and it made sense. And that's when farmers can engage and say, I know I can make a difference.
And
Melanie, yeah.
it resonated very well what you just said with me. And again, not to be too descriptive. First of all, let me start with the question of the financing. You know, if you have a system that's artificially financed, eventually it will break down. So it has to be something where the farmer sees the benefit. It has to, and regenerative agriculture, while we're talking about it like it's a new concept, a lot of the practices that are being used, farmers have been used for generations. So it's their knowledge how to best treat their fields and how to improve soil crop health as well. And it really has to be something where they see the impact. You can have an initial seeding financing, you know, if you have to buy new equipment or you have to train and then change your practices, but it has to be a sustainable system without continuous influx of subsidiaries. And you can't be too prescriptive because it needs to tackle the challenges that the farmer's facing. And you just, when we spoke, you told me, you know, there might be a year with a flood, and then all of a sudden you're back to zero. So we have to be open to a toolbox that allows for different solutions for. And let me also address, because I have to, you know, it's so close to my heart, the pesticide portion. And it's not even that I disagree. I think we can do better with less, and whether that's precision farming. I don't, at the moment, with all the climate challenges that we're facing, see yet a world without, you know, honestly, close to my heart. But in pressure, whether it's climate pressure or other pressure, helps us improve. So it is about new technologies as well, digital solutions, precision farming, full toolbox, but don't be too prescriptive, because if we lose the farmer at the beginning and they don't feel it's something they can truly buy in and push forward, then it will not generate the transformation that we're actually hoping for.
Perfect. And one of my questions was, how can the regenerative agriculture practices be scaled up while also taking into account business objectives of revenue? No, so how does that work? But I don't know if I don't think anyone has the answer perhaps to this.
Well, I mean, I think that in the U.S., we're using precision agriculture to really help us, and that we're able to look at the whole soil profile on a sample per hectare. It's not every 2 inches or anything, you know, but it's helping us really say, I don't need this nutrient everywhere. I can just put exactly what I need, exactly where I need it, and doing more with less is really the objective. And that is good. We know it's good for the environment. We know it's good for our communities. We know it's good for our bottom line. And so that's a natural thing that when we can prove that to farmers on a bigger scale, then they say, okay, yeah, I'll give it a whirl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sonia and then Charlie.
Yeah, no, so I think the best way to show, you know, what is the way forward is maybe through an example. And I think the real challenge with Regen Agri has been, how do you move from pilot to scale? You know, what does that really look like? What does that actually require? And, you know, we've signed up to our first large-scale regenerative agriculture program in France. It's working with the Vivessia Cooperative, which is an industry collaboration, to really look at how do you have landscape-based approaches to Regen Agri? So not farm by farm, but, you know, on a regional level. So it's in the Grand Est region of France, and it's aiming to work with 1,000 farmers up to 2026 and beyond. So at least to have 1,000 by 2026. And it's about recognizing that there's a variety of crops that the farmers will have over a period of time, and how do we put the right regenerative practices in to drive the success of all of them. And it's backed up by science. It's backed up by technical institutes. It's backed up by Earthworm and a number of the French universities as well. And there's 4 key principles to it. And, you know, we had to say, okay, what does this look like? And the first one is something someone mentioned a bit earlier, which is we needed to have a robust knowledge base in terms of agronomy information at farm level. It started there. We needed to start with understanding what was needed farm by farm, not over the whole landscape. The second was financing, because I agree, I think it needs to be sustainable. You can't rely on subsidies, but actually, for it to work, it needed an upfront bonus payment to kickstart the operation for the training and everything else you needed as input, but with a payment method which changes over a period of time based on the activity that's needed, but also based on the performance and the outputs actually achieved. So it's not a you start off and you keep paying more for it. It's much more nuanced in terms of the financing approach that you have. The other key principle was also really trying to understand the collaboration effort, because what do you do in one farm that affects an impact in another? How do you collaborate across the brands, the manufacturers, the scientists, the regional government, to really have a partnership approach to really drive forward what you really want to? And the last piece is around data and tools, which sounds super boring, but is really important for a lot of the things that we talked about. And there's a lot of digital tools that are evolving, possibly too many, as we were talking about before. So the trick is to say, what are the right ones? And really, that's what it's about, which is what's the data that we really want to collect? So how do we really measure soil health in ways that are sustainable? What are the right tools that are going to help us do that? And by doing it on this landscape basis, we all learn together. And I'm not saying we've cracked it. It's early stages, very frankly. But I think that's the path for me in terms of how do you really look at scaling, which is these landscape-based approaches, which is a collaborative effort.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. Collaboration is absolutely key. For us, this isn't about competitive advantage. I think in the past, folks would use sustainability as a competitive advantage tool, and it's really not. This is about all of us collectively working together to get to a much better place, not just from a climate perspective, but to build that sustainable, resilient supply chain that we all talk about. Because if we don't do that, collectively, I think we're all going to fail, and the consequences will be devastating. For sure.
Sarah?
So to answer that question, and kind of the one before, I totally agree that collaboration is a really crucial factor. There's 3.5 million organic farmers in 180 countries around the world, so we already know that it can be done and that it can be done globally. And so we can look to them for how you can achieve some of that scale. And the answer is never simple. You know, it's a combination of different factors. Financial systems definitely do need to change. You know, it's crazy that profit and yield are kind of the key metrics when we really need to be putting climate, nature, and livelihoods into the equation to what delivers good, what is a good outcome. You know, we just cannot continue with business as usual. This idea that kind of profit and yield is what we're looking for. The whole question of feeding the world isn't to do with supply. It's a much bigger question than that. And also the food system that we have at the moment isn't designed to feed the world. And I think that's kind of a bit of an elephant in the room as well. Like, our food system isn't designed to feed the world. It's primarily designed to extract profit. And if we need to have some serious conversations about what it really means to feed a population and to nurture livelihoods. So I think that's a debate that I'd really, really welcome and like to have.
Perfect. And you mentioned technology. I think several of you have mentioned technology. So what role do you see technology playing now that we have, you know, AI and so on? What role do you see technology in regenerative agriculture? And perhaps,
definitely a big one. I think we're still at the very beginning, so we can just grasp the opportunities that are in there. But if you manage to develop a precision farming tool with an AI that has all the collective data on the fields that you're actually farming and can tell you exactly where very precise to apply which kind of tool or agricultural practice, that has a huge potential in to manage both then at the end. So to have yield, to have profit, but at the same time to use their tools and the practices. And we're starting small. You know, there are a lot of pilot projects by companies. We also have Xavio. It's our digital system that we use to gather data on the fields of the farmers that are actually piloting it with us, so that they every season, every year, get better and better in applying all of the practices that they have at their disposal onto their fields to get the maximum positive output for their environment as well as for their yields. But I think the scale up is really going to be important. And I absolutely agree with the value chain collaborations. No company can do this on your own. This is really something where from the very start of the solution provider all the way to the end product and brand names, we need to work together. And I'd even expand it a little further, because I think one thing we're not touching upon is we also need to have a societal recognition that there is a value behind these new agricultural practice, and that we might also need to pay, a little bit more for our food in the end, but then have it being prepared in a sustainable fashion. But I think at the moment, while value chain has recognized the opportunity and is working together, we still haven't touched the point of we're also used to have abundant selections at a very small price, and the poor farmers upstream are the ones then paying the ticket for that.
Yeah. Charlie?
Oh, from a technology perspective, obviously it's still in its infancy. We are trialing a lot of different technology at the farm level, whether it's see and spray technology so that you're not spraying pesticide all over the place, you're using it surgically. Traffic controlled tillage is proving to work out quite well for us, and DNA barcoding, going back to your point as to what is the soil or organic matter there that you can replicate at another farm on scale. It's early days, but we're hopeful that those will reap the right benefits as we continue to scale satellite imagery, things like that. I think we're all doing it. It's just a matter of, continuing to trial to make it work and then work on the scale up from there.
Yeah.
Me here.
Meagan.
Oh, okay. Wow, so many things to comment on this. But I think that it's the same for farmers as it is for every human, that we kind of look at our daily lives and we say, where could I be better? Every day, continuous improvement. And so one of the things I look at is I monitor our fuel usage. We put biodiesel in every tractor, truck, and combine on our farm. I don't get paid for that based on the fact that I have a reduced greenhouse gas emission, but I know it's the right thing to do. And my beans are commodity beans that then enter the system. And so I think that we're like everybody else. We're looking at, how many plastic baggies we both have young daughters, how many plastic baggies I use. I'm like, oh man, I gotta figure that out. But as a mom, it's convenient. So what we've done in the soy industry is we said, hey, how many plastics can we replace with a biodegradable soy plastic? We've done it with straws. You're starting to see biodegradable plastic straws that are really made of soy oil or others. I think that we're looking for we are striving for sustainable solutions in everyday life and drop-in replacements, because I think the speakers today, we acknowledge the world isn't going to stop. We tried that during the pandemic and it didn't really work out. We like to convene, and I would have felt a lot better if the plane that I got here on had sustainable aviation fuel in it instead. So I think that your point is well taken about making sure that we're producing a meaningful crop, that we're not just producing to overproduce. But I also find a lot of meaning in coming up with that yield is important if we're going to meet these challenges, and to still have an affordable food system. I can't grow bananas in Missouri, but I would like to trade a nutritious crop with somebody who can, because I like to eat bananas. So, and then I would like the shipping to be as carbon neutral as possible with renewable fuel. So we do think about all of these things, but we have to be holistic, that we can't just fix one aspect and expect nothing else to react.
Sony, you want to add anything?
No, actually, not on technology, to be honest. On a lot of other factors, yes, but not on technology. But I can see you're dying to say something.
Maybe I'm presuming too much, but I imagine you might think that I wouldn't think technology is important, but I think it's vitally important for all the reasons that you've said. And regenerative agriculture is knowledge intensive rather than input intensive. And so we need to make sure that technology is focused around providing farmers with knowledge, and that technology is accessible to farmers to really apply in ways that are meaningful to allow them to scale regenerative agriculture.
Perfect. So I'm conscious of time, and I want to leave space for the audience for a Q&A. So I don't know if anyone in the audience. We have a lot of questions. Okay, so here, one. We can have 2-3 questions over there and here.
So enthusiastic. I like it. If I wave loudly enough.
Yeah, and can we maybe do the questions all in once, and then we'll turn to the panel. So yeah, please.
Great. Oh, thanks so much. Really, really fascinating panel, and so encouraging to hear all the work you're all doing. I just wondered if regenerative agriculture is also thought of as being restorative agriculture in terms of habitat loss for biodiversity, And Sonia, I loved what you were saying about the landscape scale, because we need to think about green corridors across the land so that, you know, animals can move. But that's also the scale at which climate impacts happen. So, yeah, just a question about biodiversity and whether that's included.
Hi. Question for Charlie. You mentioned about four-crop farming in South Africa. Could you talk a bit about that?
Sorry, four season.
Four season.
Four season,
Four
yeah.
season
So they are
farming.
able to
Grow every season.
grow every season. So whereas in Canada it's a very short
Correct.
season of 4 months or 3 months or whatever it is.
Yeah,
In South
just one
Africa it's year round, right?
Yeah. So could you talk maybe a little bit about how they do it in South Africa?
Well, I can talk about our code, sort of.
Let's have
Oh,
the
sorry.
last-
Okay, go, sorry. Okay, great. Sorry, but still.
I was wondering whether we can remember all the questions in the end.
Get it right down.
Over there, I think was the man. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. My question is a bit similar to the other ladies there. I didn't hear that much about biodiversity impacts and landscape impacts. You know, the previous panel discussion did talk about planetary thresholds being affected, and I would really hope that regenerative agriculture doesn't just look at the land that you're farming, but at the bigger, you know, the bigger landscape context.
Perfect. Okay, so the first one, Sonia, do you want
Yeah,
to?
sure.
take it?
Very, very happy to. And actually, biodiversity is one of the key aspects at the heart of regenerative farming for me. And it is absolutely looking to bend the curve of damage and loss is the way I look at it. And it's recognizing, you know, what was there before, how do you, and I think someone mentioned it before, how do you put back what was lost before? But for us, biodiversity is a core aspect. Measuring it is really hard, is the honest truth. So how do you really get measurable on it is something that I think is still in its early stages, if I'm honest. But that is a very core part of regenerative farming for me, alongside climate, water, soil health. It all has to be integrated. And I think historically, a lot of these programs had looked at these issues in isolation. The beauty of regenerative farming is it brings them all together, but also in a way that looks at the livelihoods of farmers. And to what we all said, you know, it's not going to work unless the two things work together. So absolutely at the core.
Yeah, Sarah, do you have
Yeah,
anything
I
to-
agree. And agriculture has to be seen as part of natural systems. You know, they're not separate. So it's really important that we think about these things in terms of an integrated whole. And I mean, there is some quite good peer-reviewed science on the effects of organic farming on biodiversity. I think it's something like 40% more wildlife in organic farms. And so we know that having that integrated approach to how you manage the land has a really positive effect on biodiversity. And I think we can't afford to look at it in a silo way. You have nature and farming, they have to be combined.
Perfect. Do you, Melanie or Meagan, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add?
again, absolutely agree. It can't be regenerative agriculture if biodiversity would not be considered. I think it's an important aspect. We all use different terminologies. Sometimes we call it nature positivity, sometimes we call it regenerative agriculture, but it's all about doing more with less without hurting the land and without hurting the balance of the ecosystem, and ensuring that you have automated buffer zones, that you have refuge to ensure biodiversity. So it has to be an essential concept of it.
Okay, perfect. And
But-
now,
could I add
sorry,
just
yes,
a little
please,
bit?
Meagan.
You know, if we think about, we talk often about no-till and cover crop being a big solution, right? What's the greatest example worldwide of a cropping system of no-till cover crop? Pasture. You've got pasture all over the world, right? Well, I was working with a dairy farmer in New Zealand, and you know, the banker would only fund him to go get phosphorus, going back to your financing. He didn't need phosphorus. He had tons of phosphorus. It's a dairy. They had plenty. What he needed was magnesium to help build the physical structure of the soil. And when he got the magnesium, he told his bank, don't tell anyone, he told his banker that he was going to put on, you know, phosphorus. He put magnesium on instead. And what happened is, because of the physical aspects of the magnesium, it built better pore space in the soil. And because of that, there were seeds of clover that had just been dormant for years. He hadn't seen any of this clover in nearly a generation, he said. And when he got the pore space right, he got the biological activity working at a micro level, that clover brought crop diversity to his pastures, which actually in turn profited in milk production. and he saw a huge increase, and his banker came out and he said, "I told you that phosphorus would work." And so sometimes it is on the micro level that we talk about biodiversity. I know BASF, my daughter has butterfly wings as as we work for the monarch butterfly. So we recognize that these are really important objectives, and to leave space in waterways, make sure our soil stays in place so that as we build that, we don't tear it back down by erosion. So there's micro and macro biodiversity that is happening in farms, at least across America and the world.
Yeah, perfect. I'm conscious of time, but Charlie, do you want to take the second question?
Just take it quickly.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
early days at the farm in South Africa. A lot of our projects that are related to water and water usage along the way, absolutely. Early days there so far. We are encouraged by results there. In Canada, we've had 3 years under our belt there, and we can say that fertilizer use is down 15%, emissions are down 30%, versus control farms around the farm of the future, and yields are up. So that shows that when we all work together and integrate these practices, we will get to a much better place. The challenge now is how do we scale quickly to get there?
Okay, good. So yeah, we're out of time. Sorry for the ones that couldn't ask your questions. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and yeah, I'll see you soon.